Altai has its unique and prominent history related to the civilizational space of internal Asia. It's a very broad overlap of northern Central Asia and Siberia. So internal Asia is the core of another giant space, Central Eurasia. So it's an intersection of the Mongolian civilization with the Russian one and with the Chinese one, forming a huge space in and of itself. So this overlap of civilizational spaces gives rich food for research, for studying civilization, political studies. In the current conditions of political turbulence in every area, including culture, science, law, and religion, such studies are especially relevant because they allow us to analyze political processes as related to civilizational spaces. According to civilizational political science, a civilization is simultaneously a local and global phenomenon. So civilizations transcend any borders of a single state. They overlap, they intertwine, forming a broad civilizational tapestry which shows global history. With its contours of both modern and ancient cores of civilizations. According to the classic civilizational approach, Danielewski, Spengler, and Toynbee, these cores are the spots where challenges were successfully answered, so to say. A civilization that can answer a challenge successfully exists as a cultural system by Gumilev, the supreme taxon of the ethnic hierarchy, and simultaneously as a borderless, networked cultural phenomenon. There are many ethnic and cultural systems in the modern world, enshrined in several civilizations. Civilizations as answers to challenges occur in several hotbeds of accumulation of human experience through successful natural selection of human experiences. In practical terms, identifying successful answers to challenges is impossible, but in historical perspective, you can trace it. For instance, European empires, from the Roman one to the British one, were formed successfully, bringing around the current Western civilization with its center in Washington, D.C., U.S. But of course, this Euro-Atlantic experience cannot be simply transferred to Central Eurasia. In Russia, China, and Mongolia, their own empires were formed. But on the other hand, we can view them as interconnected civilizationally, even though a single center of global civilization is not formed from these. So local civilizations that exist now, the Western one, the Russian one, the Chinese one, the Islamic one, the Indian one, and the Mongolian one, The Mongolian one, with its name, deserves a special conversation because the current Mongolian state emerged in the place where all the major empires of nomads were pulsing with life. And they comprised a common civilization, similarly to how the Western civilization was born. The Handi and other regions of Mongolia are the cradle of the Khanates and the other capitals of nomad empires, including the current Mongolian state. And these states, like the Western empires, have existed for almost 2,500 years in a cascade. There were phases of development of this Mongolian civilization. The Mongolian civilization was also nurtured not just from the experiences of its center, but also from the experiences of the neighboring Russian and Chinese civilizations. All three were tapping into the big potential of the Manchurian and Tibetan and Chinese civilizations born on the outskirts of Asia and living through its cycle until they were more or less integrated. The Jurjay, Damgur, and Jungar civilizations were phases of the process. Altai has a special place in it with its ethnic and cultural system. Just to give you an observation, I can say that Tomsk archaeologists made a very interesting discovery, finding out that in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, before the first Turkic Khaganate, they had the first furnaces for melting iron. And these technologies, created primarily by nomads, were later spread to other Asian regions, reaching Japan. So these furnaces were actually copied to a T, and they were used in Japan for samurai swords. Interestingly, Alexander, you have 2 more minutes. Okay. So I actually managed to touch upon Altai a little bit. And I just wanted to say that Altai has a tradition of becoming a significant area of internal Asia. And it has been a center of technological or cultural development several times now, even though the course of the civilizations where the discoveries were mostly made were outside the Altai Mountains. And this didn't prevent Altai from gaining a role as a hotbed of civilizational development. So political and multi-confessional Russia is close to Mongols by history and the place of residence with its Burat and Tuvinians, and they live in the same legal and political conditions as other nations of Russia, because the civilizational code formed over the ages of intertwining of Russian civilization with the Mongolian civilization has been working properly. Altai's example is a very telling one. In the 18th century, there was a deep crisis shaking the Mongolian civilization, the Jungar War. And Altai pretty naturally became part of the Russian state. And in compliance with its civilizational code, Russia became a peacemaker and protector of the peoples of internal Asia, which is proved by the history of their nations being integrated into the Russian Empire and then subsequently becoming independent, like today's Mongolia. It was in Mongolia that and in Russia that the Mongolian nomads saw a way to gain a new life. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much, Alexander. So you started with the important things, the big things, civilizational approach, and big communities that we call civilizations, touching upon Altai as a point of intersection of Mongolian and Russian civilizations, mostly these two. We also have another distinguished guest, Alexei Maslov, who, like a Buddhist deity, is polydextrous, director of the Institute of African and Asian States. So he was going to continue civilizational approach, but through another lens, the Eurasian perspective, a view from another lens. So over to you. Thank you. Distinguished colleagues, I will indeed try to take another perspective here because Alexander, my good friend and colleague, voiced the perspective of Russian side, but approaches to Eurasianship and Altai as part of Eurasian space are not universally recognized. If you look at our closest neighbor's perspective, China, for instance, that wants to claim China as part of the bigger Chinese civilization, you will see that Eurasianship concept doesn't really work for China in this way. I mean, it's a separate question why, but Eurasianship has been a very active concept in the minds of the Russian civilization. And while technically Eurasianship and Eurasian space can be translated into Chinese and, discussed. But in terms of sense, it will not be understood. And that's another point that differentiates our approaches from the approaches of our closest neighbor, the great neighbor. China does not consider the Eurasian space a contiguous civilization or a common civilizational space. We have been discussing it in terms of civilizational approaches, and we've mentioned taxons as taxonomy units through which we can compare civilizations. But China mostly views the space as a space of trade. And it's trade, in its opinion, that unites different countries, and it's really doesn't matter whether they're politically united. I mean, trade is key, and as soon as it's interrupted, the space just drops out of the area of influence. Historically, this has been determined like this, and it's not just about different scientific points of view. I mean, that would be discussed in a research conference. It's a historical point of view that's different. To give you a simple example, back in 2002, Russia started discussing the known option of building a road from Altai to Xinjiang Uyghur and China. Economically, it sounded like a sound idea, but in terms of environmental concerns, this was postponed, put on the back burner, and never discussed again. Moreover, China at that point was very reserved about the idea of trade routes through or from Altai to the People's Republic of China. But the situation has changed in 2015. China itself brought forward an initiative of bringing a road from China to Altai and to Russia, because internally they adopted a program of supporting trade in the northwestern regions of China adjacent to Altai and Kazakhstan. And these are underdeveloped and stagnated regions. And the idea was very simple, to enrich the regions with money and build the infrastructure. But the goods needed to be brought somewhere, and this is where Altai comes into play. From 2015 to 2020, this started a lot of publications in the Chinese press saying that Altai used to be a part of a Chinese empire, and there were some echoes of Jungaria, and the Manchus were settled there at some point, and mentioning a lot of myths and a lot of reality too. And the primary impulse to these studies were not cultural considerations, but purely pragmatic considerations. And in 2022, just a year ago, basically, they continued the discussion of the potential of building a road through the Yukok Plateau to China. But through environmental concerns, again, we were stopped in our tracks. Interestingly, though, in terms of many spatial and landscape conditions, the Altai and China, adjacent China, are very much alike. But China has never viewed environmental concerns as something stopping the building of bridges or roads, but in Russia it does play a big part. So in these terms, our mindsets are very different. And right now they are continuing this discussion. So a road like this has been stopped in its construction for environmental considerations. And I've discussed these issues many times with our Chinese colleagues. Interestingly enough, we seem to be living in different spaces. I mean, we talk to them about the environment, keeping the environmental and cultural balances, but China says it's beneficial. I mean, you'll have roads, you'll have logistic infrastructure, you'll have money, you'll have warehousing, and the areas will be thriving. So that's a totally different approach. I'm not trying to judge here. It's just a totally different approach to spatial and cultural types. And when we talk about the Eurasian space and Altai as part of this junction of many spaces, this idea is only in the Russian philosophical and sometimes political tradition. It's not in the other countries' traditions. Sometimes it seems that our positions are pretty firm because we have built a certain system of integration of many notions. The universalism of a Russian mindset, the cosmism by philosopher Berdyaev, is in line with the Russian philosophy and political thinking, but our partners with which we have to deal have a totally different mindset. Again, I will not be judging here, but it's important to understand that our approaches are not universal by any means, and we tend to forget to explain our thinking to other spaces of the Earth. I mean, we think that everybody views things the same, but it's not true. And however Altai and Altai culture and civilization will develop, and economy as well, we will have to deal with our closest neighbors, more or less, including Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan. And in these terms, our cultural approaches and their explanation are very important, not just for our domestic intellectual market, but also for the external one. And to conclude my brief presentation, I would like to say that we need to explain how we treat spaces. The spatial thinking in the Russian civilization and in the civilizations that surround us can be very different. Thank you so much for your time, colleagues. Thank you, Alexei, so much for an interesting contribution and interesting note added to today's discussion. I think it's important that you stressed that we not just need to know something, but we also need to explain it to our partners. And it's one of the topics and one of the challenges of today. We need to formulate what we want and how we see Altai, and what we want to project to the external audiences, among others. In this respect, it's my pleasure to give the floor to the next speaker, Alevtina Makavos, a representative of the official Russian position here. She has a lot of hats she juggles, but as an ethnographer and anthropologist, I am the most pleased to recommend her as an advisor to the head of the Federal Agency for Ethnic Affairs. And I invite her to explain the official position of Russia of today, how the Kremlin views Russia, Altai. Thank you so much. So I will not have my slides pulled up, right? Well, our section is too mysterious and too enigmatic. We don't get PowerPoints. Well, I wanted to show you links to certain documents, and I'm very surprised that they will not pull up my presentation. However, dear colleagues and the audience, you Oh, you can see it. I have a very interesting presentation. So we can see the presentation. Yes, I see it on the screen, but as far as I understand, I have to explain it when to flip the slides. I actually get a clicker. Okay, thank you so much. So you have to press left or right. Okay, some technicalities we have to deal with. So after reputed speakers such as Alexei and Alexander, I'll take the floor, and I'm really grateful for setting the floor. For me, is I read the mission of the Altai territory as a territory of neospheric development. When I read this document, I saw that this mission is very well integrated into the social and economic development of the Republic of Altai. And apparently, we are emphasizing private-public partnership. And the government of the Russian Federation is emphasizing municipal practices within the framework of national priorities. So I asked my colleagues whether we had premiums on environment, but they told me that environmental concerns have not been integrated enough with national priorities, which is why I decided to give some suggestions as to how to link the two, to explain them to our public, and in this noble mission, to enhance the effectiveness of PPPs while implementing national policies, because among other things, national policies envisaged project activities of NGOs aimed at ensuring ethnic cultural development and national harmony in the Russian Federation. So there is no next slide? Oh, there it is. Okay. So there is an interconnection of the PPP tools, such as legislation, strategic planning, documentation, things that have already been adopted, including the Program of Social and Economic Development, and state programs. The national policy and other program implementation related to these particular lines of national policy, such as culture, tourism, environment, all intertwined, as well as organizational support to NGO leadership, NGOs that initiate all these programs, including the educational, cultural, and environmental ones. And public and state monitoring plays a role. Today, the Republic of Altai has been living within the framework of social and economic development of the Russian Federation for 2022-2024. It's a big regulatory document, and if you look at page 83 of it, I highlighted in red that the culture section says a complex of various events and their deliverables aimed at preserving the cultural heritage, something that we've been discussing, reinforcing civil identity and moral values, as well as organizing the leisure of the society, including educational and other activities. Okay, so when I was mentioning different programs, we can see a list of state programs where money is allocated, and since 2010 we have been living in the program targeted financing. If you look at section 2, okay, it's not working again. Okay, back, no. Okay, whatever. If you look at section 2, you will see at talent development envisages 4 programs, and you can look at the document and the presentation subsequently and study it on your own. So there is public monitoring of the implementation of the programs, and one of them is state national policy implementation, second, culture, tourism. So you can see the programs there. So within the framework of state national policies program, we need to engage civil society institutions in the implementation of the national policy, and funds are allocated to the budgets of the regions of the Russian Federation to co-fund these commitments. These are considerable amounts, about 300 million rubles annually, and the Republic of Altai has been subsidized regularly in support of economic and social development of small indigenous peoples of Siberia, the north and the far east of Russia. So you can see 4 regions mentioned here where small indigenous peoples are settled in a compact way. And there are allocations to education and outreach, national and cultural autonomy, and the support of the Cossack community. Also, I would point out that under the federal law of the Russian Federation on NGOs, there is a priority of allocation of funds for socially oriented projects of NGOs. And environmental initiatives are stressed here. If you uphold and promote these environmental initiatives, you can enjoy the benefits of socially oriented funding. Look at this financial support. So you can get money, you can get organizational support, training and teaching support, even retraining.
So this is actually part of this review. If you look at the allocation of funding from the federal budget, you can read information about it from our reports. I highlighted on that only the funding which was allocated only to socially oriented NGOs at the federal level. I'm not talking even about the regional and municipal levels. In 2019, it was 9.1 billion rubles, and in 2020, it was 162 billion rubles. In 2022, we'll have the public data. We'll be having about around 300 billion rubles allocated for the NGOs in general. And then another provision on the Russian competition on the best municipal practice. I would like you to be engaged into this competition. So the municipal bodies of the Republic of Altai should be taking part in this. These are all public and civic initiatives targeted at implementing this noble mission, Mountain Altai, the territory of the North-Spheric development. This is an all-Russian competition. And there is one nomination also included. This is governmental national policy. These funds are allocated into 2 categories. The first provision has a fund allocated for some villages, and then you can apply for some municipal practices awards. The first place, for instance, this year, we included some changes to the tune of 42 million rubles for the first place awarded. Initially, it was 50 million rubles. The 5th place received 8.5 million rubles. Now it turns out to be 10 million rubles. So then, if you're talking about small municipal body taking part in this competition and then present itself as a contender, I saw, for instance, some villages having 1,000 people living there. They are allocated as an award 2 million rubles. This huge contribution from our activities to their initiatives. I would like to highlight another program. which are being run as part of major programs. So, for instance, these programs support national literature activities. This year we published Ontology of the Peoples of Russia under the heading The Public Wisdom. I'm close to ending my presentation. Altai language is also another publication. There is one wisdom translated from Altai to Russian language. A tree will fall, mountain will go away, fade away, but the people remain and the mission remain. That's the main idea. Since you have a mission, then you need to include the suggestions you might be having into the final resolution of the project so that we can highlight them as part of this program being implemented. We need to adjust all the public initiatives as part of implementation of this program which are announced by the Republic of Altai as part of a mission Altai, territory of the nospheric development. So this program can be efficiently run at the federal, regional and municipal level. As part of this coalition, I'd like to suggest that as part of our interforum activities, we can arrange for a round table at the platform of the permanent representation of the Republic of Altai in Moscow to develop mechanisms and tools to increase the efficiency for implementing of the public-private partnership Altai nospheric development. And we need to contribute to engagement of the young people into this program. So I managed to stick within the time frame. Thank you. Thank you again that you managed to stay within the time limits. I believe it was a direct, real answer to the request of Alexei Alexandrovich, so that he mentioned that they would like to see some concrete steps and hear some concrete steps from us. And Alevtina Nikolaeva managed to align these concrete steps with the spiritual parts. And as she said, there is really pretty much money. They are there, you need to take them. This sounds quite optimistic. I'd like to get back to the important and the initial topic, the cultural and spiritual code of the Republic of Altai. And as my fellow Alexei mentioned, that our model contains some spiritual part of it, I would like to give the floor to Alexei Kozyrev, the Dean of the Philosophical Faculty of the Moscow State University, who is a philosopher, I believe, can highlight and enlighten us on what's that attractive to Altai, which has been luring people for many years before the real big money came. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. My colleagues, for instance, Alexei Kozyrev mentioned some philosophers, Berdaev and nospheric development, mentioned by Bernatsky. I'm pleased to hear that this philosophical aspect is present here as part of this Altai conversation. I'd like to mention another philosopher, Alexei Losev. He has been celebrating, we were celebrating his Jubilee 130s. Our President, Mr. Putin, was referring to his quotes. An important notion in his works is a myth. That's the highest reality. This is a reality we use to understand the world, both intellectually and spiritually. And since we talk about developing territories, about our future, about planning the history, we shouldn't be avoiding such really high notions. The myth of Altai. What is Altai? I'm not a specialist in Altai affairs. I'm not a really Altai scholar. It's the second time I'm here. I've just arrived this morning. But I believe that for the Russian history, it's a very specific place. Because many people were heading here, peasants, old believers, and Belovodya. This is what we have in now here. Bukhtarminsk and Ulmonsk valleys. This is the understanding of people from the 17th and 18th century. This is the valley or land of freedom, where there's no exploitation, where everybody is equal, where you can walk the snow with bare feet, where there is a white king, there is a white Tsar living here. And the idea of something white, pure, the real white, the white fish, the white snow capes, and the word Altai, the part of it all refers to something pure, white, transparent. Almas, which can be translated from Russian into English as diamond, means also transparent. Altai is a stone on which the tree of the world grows. This is part of our fairy tale methodology. Some religious people were coming here. It was not only a mission of Orthodox people, because we can't imagine the history of Russia as the history of canonic Orthodox beliefs. There were many sects here which were banished from the main location territories of Russia. And Altai was one of the spots of freedom where the Russian people were heading to, because one of the reasons for it is politically it wasn't anything in lands, because Bukhtarminsk and Hongst Valley were not part of the Russian Empire until the 19th century. It was some sort of a neutral territory, I believe. And as it was being colonized, then people were coming here and started looking for Belavodia at the Aponsk Islands. For instance, Bessonov published some reports and some stories on traveling to Aponsk Islands. And those searches for Belavodia were being continued until the Russian-Japanese War in 1905. There were some tours and expeditions prepared and sent to look for Belavodia, for this magical region. What does it mean? It means that in our national mythology, there is this vector, there is this strive for another land, another heaven, to find the city of God on earth. The Russian utopian historian Chistov counted 12 spots where the Russian people were heading in search for this white kingdom. It wasn't only Altai, it was also Kitezh, it was also Vig, which was located beyond the Onyezha region. These were also Olonetsk lands. We can track this topography of the holy routes, because the search for these white wisdoms were accompanied by some geographical endeavors. It was a very important factor and part of development of the Russian history, the spiritual one, of course. And when I found myself here in Altai, for me, this remembrance of such impetus is very important. So, talking in the Gumilov's language, the strive for passionality, which is an attribute of the Russian nation, because there are many ethnical nation components in the Russian structure. So because the old believers, once they were heading here, they knew that a new people is living here, Altai Kiji, and they were building their life in combination, in understanding with these people. It wasn't conquering, it wasn't colonizing these people, as was the case in the United States. It was collaboration, co-living, a peaceful one, which is very, very important for our history. so that we can now talk about the fact that our national polls should be based not on some ethnical superiority of one nation, but rather on this dialogue of nations and confessions. And since we talk about the Belgorod, remember about Nikolai Rerich, which was here in the 1920s looking for Shambhala. What is Shambhala? This is the Buddhist Belgorod. This is that white kingdom for Buddhists. And this is where he makes his beautiful paintings, which become part of the Russian treasure, artistic treasure from the 20th century. The museums boast having such pictures by Rerich. Yes, yes. It's a very important factor of this interconfessional dialogue. And also member to the Council of the President of the Russian Federation on collaborating between the religious unions and bodies. For me, it's important to highlight this aspect that this territory is a territory of dialogue. And last but not least, we all watched the movie by Lungin, Ostrov Island. This is actually an interpretation of the Russian code. An island is not necessarily part of land surrounded by water. Altai is also an island. Mr. Tsendorsky, the civilizational thinking, has a concept of Russia as an island because he sees Russia as an island in the raging ocean of various fears and emotions. But Altai, we can see it as also an island too. This is a measurement of the Altai myth. This is a special territory. As he referred to it as a new measurement of the dimension, space. The space is felt and seen differently in Altai, so as the time. And entering this different space and different time allows us to reassemble and re-engineer our identity. Thank you very much. The time can be managed differently in Altai, but we're stuck to a traditional approach and stuck to our time limits. Actually, the presentation by our colleague Alexei reminded me of the last article by Malevin, Vladimir, on China, headed as superiority of uncertainty. So because uncertainty of myths, it's quite an interesting remark to hear about, and a myth as a superior reality. Such notion could be a good topic to discuss when we approach the summary of today's session. We will come back to this idea that the myth can be the superior reality. I would like to give the floor to a person who is dealing with a practical activity in terms of maintaining the safety and integrity of Altai. Igor Karmelkov is director with the Altai Biospheric Natural Reserve. And for him, Altai and all the environmental protection activities in Altai are daily routine. Yes, thank you so much. Please, just launch the presentation.
Росконгресса они давно запрашивали, долго мучили, где моя презентация, я давно выставил.
The organizers from Roscongress have requested my presentation, and I sent it to them, and I don't know if they have the presentation on. Yes, they're going to be a presentation. Everyone will love to look at pictures views from Altai. The name of my presentation is Altai Civilization, and we'll see some practical consideration included into this presentation. This starts with talking about the cultural code of Altai. And we can't but mention the collusion of civilization by Huntington, who mentioned it as we having such fissure points. No one can disregard that we have some fissures, we have some difference between the culture, and Altai is a place where civilizations can approach each other and enrich each other. Here we had some really the mightiest ones, pride unions, and people's unions, which originates from the really medieval times. We had really huge cultures here, Indian culture, Turk culture, and all the cultures from a long time ago. Yes, and this territory was referred to the ports, melting pot of civilization. It was referred to it as by Rarick and other thinkers. So the cultural code has been retained not only here, but also the code which has been passed through Altai. So many nations consider Altai as their cradle. And also Russian, as Russian poets put it, we are the skiffs with the small eyes. And I would like to refer to the quotation of the social anthropologist Gustav Le Bon, who is not long with us. The psychological constellation of the race is a synthesis not only of the living creatures, but also of the ancestors who contributed to its establishment. Caracols, Skiffs, Pazarikts, and other nations. So these parts of these nations' cultures has been retained here. It's all included into this code. It's necessary to mention that the nature is where this cultural code is maintained. And since there is no nature, there will be no cultural code anymore. This is what I would like to dwell on, because if we talk about development of Altai in general, what can we say? Everybody understands it's clear that we are going the globalization way, whether we give some resistance to it or not. We ask ourselves, is it good or bad for us? Is it a threat or is it benefit for us, especially for Altai? In Altai, we have a notion of biospheric natural reserves, Katungs, Altaisk natural reserves. It could seem that's very far from us, but it's related to some noospheric development issues, about two biospheric development issues. So, since humankind is developing, we are utilizing resources. During the USSR times, we were studying economical geography. The whole USSR was divided into some geographical and economical resources because neither region could be developed without resources. And North sphere is a definition of the culture and resources. We are living in this dimension. Everything is happening around it and inside of it. And there is a joke, and then the forester came and started talking about some sad things. This is where we have some major problems. For instance, where we have our tourist camps and tourist resorts located in our Altai region. This is how we build our region. So if we could take some videos and footages from the air, the picture would be really more devastating. We have waste sites, huge ones. We have solid waste sites, and there are many of them in Altai. This is a huge acute problem for our region. We need to be developing our cultural code, of course, but we need to deal with this, some real hands-on things. I was flying a helicopter this year. I took a picture in the valley of Chalshman. This is where we develop our tourism. We have a tourism resort there. One tourism resort is adjoined to another. It's very really hard to distinguish where there is a border between them, where there are some spots of green. We are working to improve things in this area, both at the ministry level, Ministry of Natural Resources, but also in our Altai Natural Reserve. We all described all the challenges ahead of us. We have modern research saying and bringing some conclusion that we need to make thoughts about what's happening, what's going down in our region, and what to do about it. I would like to make some close quotes of Lebanon. So, if the time will come or not come, but we need to decide which ideas should have priority. We need to celebrate the ideas of nospheric and biospheric development, but we need to say that we won't maintain any Altai and Russian code if we don't preserve the nature as a basis for these cultural and spiritual codes. Just a simple example, especially for guests. If you travel to Altai, you would like to see Altai. You don't want to see here Sochi, nor Caucasus, nor Karelia. We need to preserve Altai as a unique place. What we need to do about it? We need to draft a strategy for environmental and financial and economic development of Altai. It shouldn't be some really super intelligent document saying everything, nothing simultaneously. Reasonable sufficiency, this should be the guiding principle of this concept. If we want to preserve Altai, we need to maintain it and preserve it, considering the environmental, economic principles. Thank you very much, Igor, for your contribution. Very emotional one, very fiery one. Yes, of course, we switch sports calendar because I've been moderating this session. I need to limit my participants, but I would like to give the floor to myself now and turn into the speaker. And therefore, I would like to kindly ask Alexei Alexandrovich to make me stick to the time limit if I will go beyond. Thank you very much. I will fulfill this mission. Please launch this same presentation. I don't think it's that necessary, but anyway.
Не, это, по-моему, не моя, да, вот.
Yes, it wasn't mine, but mine has vanished somehow. We had two presentations mentioned the Huntington civilization theory, civilization plates theory, and also I'd like to mention Tsimbursky, talking about island of Russia, or Russia is an island. Tsimbursky thought that Russia as an island could exist, that there are different waterways surrounding it. That's very important for this. These waterways should be dividing civilizations, impeding them from collision. I would like to talk about the border territories playing a huge role in this concept. And in my view, one of the key values of Altai is that this territory is a bordering territory. This is a civilization of historical and cultural communities. And these civilizations are colliding here, but they're not overlapping. Because if we take Mongolian civilization, Russian civilization, Chinese civilization, here they have this bordering point. They approach each other, touch each other, but not really much. If we take, for instance, a shirt, if we see two parts of the shirt, if they don't stick together, then we can see in this chest hole that there's a body, and then the body is not equal to the shirt. We see something because of the fact that something doesn't stick together. When these waterways between the civilization are here, then we see something in between. It's not a void. It's not something useless. It's an entrance for this gas materia, which can be referred to as gas materia, which we don't see it normally. If we see bordering territories where there is no really tight approach of civilization. We see some lights, some holes, and look into it, seeing what's happening beyond our national borders and our governments and states. We see some different dimension here. I'm not that mystical as Rarick or Malawi. I'm just talking from the perspective of simple geography. We see some whole way that we can see beyond the world of regular social systems. And not everybody is able to see it, and not everybody can feel it. We can refer to these people as extrasensoric abilities, people who are able to feel this light, transfer this light into different, and to look at beyond collective unconsciousness, as referred to by Jung, and Altai called it as calculated marginality. So this is something which is placed beyond our rational logic. Alexei, for instance, was referring to as the experience of our Chinese fellows. There's a collective unconsciousness which is stored in this place beyond our reach. Oracles, shamans, these are the people who can look beyond this border, who are instinctively feeling it, who can transfer it into visions which can be understood by us.
It is these people that Altai has always been drawing, and they were looking for Belavodie here. They were looking for things that are different, and it's this kind of people that continue building various, shelters from the apocalypse here. I know that the properties are getting more expensive because people who are survivalists are coming here too, because they feel something, they can see something, whatever you call it, Belavodie, Shambhala, or something else, it doesn't really matter. And lastly, I will not take too much of your time. I would just like to say that, as my presentation's title goes on the first slide, a word of Altai's keepers, or guardians of Altai. We keep forgetting that the Altai people live on Altai, and they've been here for a long time. They are used to the local world. They know how to work with it, how to feel it. They've actually been guarding it until the time we started building these resorts here. And it's these people and their culture that has been carrying these symbols. They've been living with the transporter reality, this gap, for a while we have only been observing it for like 2 or 3 days when we come here. It's my 9th time here. I'm usually here for an expedition, not for a conference. And I know that the native Altai people have preserved these codes to a large extent, and by not just studying their culture, but by preserving it, and Alevtina has already mentioned that we do have resources for it, it is by preserving their culture that we can touch the worlds that lie beyond the normal social systems. And I'm really happy that we have 2 wonderful representatives of the Altai people here in our session. And their 2 presentations are exactly dedicated to the cultural codes that I'm sure their culture has preserved indeed. And I will allow myself to disagree with Victor a bit, because nature is, of course, nature, but there are guardians of this nature whose culture is also threatened right now. And for all of us, not just for the participants of today's session, but for the whole humanity, this nature and this culture are important. And to bridge my intervention with the next presentation, I will act as a moderator again. Alexei didn't even have the time to tell me to finish. Well, maybe I would take this opportunity. Since he cut his time short, I can say that we'll have a wonderful presentation by Maxim Mikhailov, to which we would like to invite you, because many of the things that he has mentioned here are in this book. So my best recommendations to him indeed. And now over to you again. Thank you so much, Alexei. And now I give the floor to Tamara Sadov, Director of Humanitarian Studies, Institute of the Republic of Altai, for a presentation that is called The Sacred Codes of Altai. Well, they're so sacred and so well encoded that my computer failed to open this presentation, I guess. So I don't even know in advance what the presentation is about. I'll be looking forward to it just like you will. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to the forum. Even though I had my big doubts whether I should voice everything I had to say. You know, you've seen the advertisement for the forum with its beautiful pictures of Altai, but not a single Altai native person there, a hunter or anyone else. As Maxime has mentioned, and all the speakers have mentioned already, Altai is guarded and preserved through the efforts of the people who live on this territory. Well, I've been here for a long, long time. You know, the code of sacralization of Altai is a difficult one to breach because, you know, it has many centuries of development. I mean, you can just flip through the slides. I also put some beautiful pictures of Altai here, but there are some specific ones that I will mention. So, speaking about the sacrality of Altai, I can say that one of the main codes of it is that, you know, the people who live there view Altai as a living being, you know. This place is in constant dialogue with local people, hence all the mindsets, all the perspectives on the land itself and the rights that are authentic and that are under threat and were persecuted throughout history, but people keep maintaining them. These rights are not just a set of mechanical actions, rather they keep upgraded the connection of the people to the nature and the spirit of the place. We can stop the slides here. Every object in the landscape of Altai is really online, is in touch with the people. There are springs that are beneficial, valleys, and with all the swarms of the spirits that are supposed to keep them. And of course, there are different types of communication with them. The most common one, as you have seen from the picture, is the right of worshipping Altai. And this dialogue of the people with the place helps us preserve the living structure of Altai. I think this is one of the main elements of the enigmatic code of Altai. Indeed, this is a territory of myth, because people have been sanctifying the land in their songs, in their worshipping, and they've been updating and living through these experiences, and this is the great power of Altai. The Pazyryk culture and other artifacts that you will see on the slides, the Kiriksul, the Balbal, the petroglyphs of ancient cultures, not even fully decoded by archaeologists yet, are very important. You can see a drawing from Kalbaktash. These are all places of worship, among other things. And century after century, they have been places of a pilgrimage from the Neolithic times. By looking at them, you flip through the pages of history, going down to the old Turkic, ancient Turkic, and other drawings and petroglyphs. The people living on this territory have always maintained their tight connection with the landscape. And probably the most important thing about these places of worship is that they're not just ethnographic sites. You know, the cult of the ancestors is still pretty much alive. I mean, you can speak at length about it, but in conclusion, I would like to show you a number of other pictures that we have as an aftermath of mass tourism, when tourists misunderstand the meaning of Altai sites and the rights of Altai. And of course, this disturbs the contiguity and the connection of the people to the nature. You can see some acts of clear vandalism here, and I can see a group of wonderful, beautiful people who have been annually fighting against the vandals and painting over the pictures, but still you can see it year after year, reoccurring. So our efforts have to continue. But we have very limited capacities. The Chuya Road, they've been trying to preserve, and this has to be commended. We cannot go on with vandals. What I would like to say is that the sanctity of these rights and these sites can be viewed as an environmental culture. You know, this should be an integral part of the image of Altai as a noospheric preserve. We don't need to invent anything new. We can just turn to the experiences of our people, and we can reroute tourism, because we do need tourism. It's a priority, but it has to be a bit different. We've been trying to voice this on many fora, and I think we are entitled to do so, because as Igor has already said, we have our own relationship with nature. And apart from the sites already preserved by the state, there are many others where we cannot put up fencing and shut off the territory. And a lot of businesses and tourism have been intruding upon them. So we need to go back to the mindset and the rights of the people and view it as part of environmental culture and streamline the strategy of Altai development in the context of tourism. I have a lot of respect to our neighbors, Mongolia, which has been preserving sacred sites at the state level. At a presidential level, they would announce that something is a sacred mountain, for example, and they would set it up as a site for rights with the participation of many top personalities, including top officials and the president. I think this is something that we should practice in Russia too. Altai is a very special area, a very special territory that needs to be preserved by the whole society. Thank you very much, Tamara. I actually invite you specifically to the presentation of my book because it concerns another type of tourism, another type of model of development of Altai. I think you would be interested in it. And with this, I would like to give the floor to yet another speaker, representative of Altai, Irina Irkimo, director of the Anohia National Museum. Many of you visited it yesterday and saw the wonderful exhibits. Rima will talk about one of the local citizens who actually tried to transmit the cultural codes through visual art, Grigoriy Charosgurkin. So before I begin my intervention, I would like to ask an Altai traditional question. From which Altai are you hailing? It really matters what kind of Altai you're coming from. Our colleagues from Mongolia would say from the Mongolian Altai, and you coming from Moscow would say from the Moscow Altai. To us, Altai, the concept means a lot. It's a birthplace, it's a native land, it's a midland, it's the center of the universe. Altai is also deity, Altai Hudai, or the god of Altai, that sees everything, hears everything, preserves everything, and talks. And this is probably what the cultural code of Altai is all about, the code that our colleagues have been discussing at such length now. So, in his art, back in the beginning of the 20th century, Grigory Gurkin, the artist, tried to express it. He studied in the Altai Spiritual Mission School, and then he was part of the 30 native peoples of Siberia, and he was a disciple of Ivan Shishkin and graduated from the Emperor's Art Academy. The very first art made by him has something to do with the idea of Altai. In 1907, he created what is calling this Han Altai. It's a lifelong painting that he made starting from 1907, and the last version was made in 1936. Even before the exhibition was opened in Tomsk, Grigory Potanin tried to comment on this, saying that Altai for Choros Gurkin is not a particular specific place, but these are rather studies and sketches of all the places that Gurkin has been to. If you look at it at first sight, it seems like a simple landscape, but there is a lot of ethno-cultural codes here, such as cedar tree, the triangular mountains, and an eagle in the first version of the picture. And in his other works, Choros Gurkin also tried to explain the idea of Altai. I don't have much time. Okay, I have trouble flipping the slides, but I can see it on my own display. But here's a unique picture. Noospheric thinking is reflected here, something to do with global and spatial thinking. We've already heard it from our colleagues. So this unique painting of 1920 is called A Shaman's Universe, the tripartite world, the midland where people live, humans live, the upper world and the lower world. In the upper world, you can see spiritual beings and you need to interact with it. So there are some cult servants, shamans, that manage the communications. In the left part, there are two of such servants. There were different categories of shamans that interacted with the upper and the lower world. Only shamans could interact with the lower world. They had their own paraphernalia, such as the traditional clothing and a tambourine. And they had their own cultural formulas of interacting with the spirits. For the upper world, they had a specific outfit that served to communicate with it. And in interacting with such forces, the shaman met the spirits or the energy of the mountains. Even today, people try to climb mountains look at the springs and still worship the spirits of Altai. Many things have been said about these spirits in the legends and the myths. And Taras Gurkin, having graduated from a realistic school of painting and knowing folk arts and crafts very well, having studied the paintings on the mountains very well, was able to create a holistic image of this tripartite world. There are different names to mountain spirits, and he tried to visualize them. So these forces are shown, visualized as different beings. He took the Scythian, non-syncretic imagery as the background for his own. Every morning, a traditional Altai person will rise up and speak to the sun, appeal to the deity of the sun, worship the deity of the sun. So the Altai people are in harmony with the outside world. They understand that every being has its life, its anima, and they have a right to live. So people who come here always wonder at the sanctity and the purity of Altai, and that comes from the fact that we have always interacted with the outside world in this way, and Mr. Gurkin tried to visualize it. He has some wonderful drawings of domestic spirits. You know, when a person, for instance, goes hunting, they need to worship some spirits, the spirits of the ancestors, so that they would allot a fair share of game during hunting to him, whether it's a deer or any other animal. And they need to allot just enough for their well-being. And the last picture I would like to show is of 1926, Altaian utopia, sort of idyllic Altai. It's an watercolor drawing. And this shows that people interact with spatial beings, with the cosmos, and they talk to the evil and the good spirits of the upper and lower world and live in harmony. But interestingly, in this one, the lower world is kind of neglected. There are evil spirits in the lower world, such as Irli, but the sons of the evil spirit are also the keepers of the dwellings of the people. So there is a certain harmony between the upper and the lower beings. They all guard the dwellings of the people. And in this watercolor painting, in 1926, having returned from immigration, Gurkin tried to express what Altai should be like. He had done a lot in the meantime. He opened a school, he made textbooks himself, and this is his picture of the ideal Altai. We actually gathered here for the same purpose, to understand what Altai is and what ideal Altai should be. So paintings by Gurkin are very relevant. Another thing I would like to touch upon. Oh, the one click. Okay. Rima, we don't have much time. Okay, I'm wrapping up. Here is his house where he lived, and we try to restore it right now as a museum, and we interact with various institutions, and I invite you to see it. Our academy has been doing a lot of work. Several diploma works have actually theses have been dedicated to the restoration of this house. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Rima. And it's time for us to wrap up this session. I'm truly grateful to our audience. I've been watching the audience closely, and very few people left. Usually the first session is less attended. I would like to thank our speakers for their punctuality and discipline. And let me recall that in the very beginning, we decided that in this hour and a half, we would try to find the answer to the question of what the Altai code is. I think thanks to Rima, we managed to understand that apart from Choros Gurkin, nobody truly comprehended it so far. And let me comment, Choros Gurkin is a very interesting example of fusion of European education and local culture, because he was a disciple of Shishkin. And it is in this synergy, big and small traditions, it is probably possible to unlock the code that we've been trying to unlock with us, with you today. I guess we failed, but we did an honest attempt. Again, I would like to thank all the participants. Maybe somebody else wants to add something. Maybe somebody has discovered a new code, a code of their own. Maybe somebody from the audience. But we have 2 more days ahead of us in the plenary session. There will be many different codes discussed there, and we have 2 more days, and the third, actually, when we all leave here. Over to you. I would like to say that the code of Altai is very difficult to unlock, but it's always in the people's wisdom, of the wisdom of the native people. Quite so, quite true, and this interaction that we try to establish today could be a small step in this big endeavor. And I guess with this, we can wrap up this session. Thank you all so much. So, I have a lot of hats to juggle this morning because there's also the presentation of my book. I'm not sure what they want me to do for this presentation. And while everybody is still here, let me say a few words about this, I guess. Or maybe Alexei will add. Dear colleagues, indeed, again, let me draw your attention to Mr. Mikhailov's work. He was a wonderful moderator today, but he also has a wonderful book, which is a result of his many years of study, and hopefully not the last volume. It's a very comprehensive book that compares many cultures, and I think he's probably one of the best cultural anthropologists and ethnographers of today, describing not only Altai peoples, but also the contact between cultures and the comparison between cultures. And it's very rare to see so much respect and accuracy in assessments in a book. You know, in Russian cultural anthropology, there's a lot of influence of Western cultural processes. But in my opinion, our colleague here was able to successfully show the nascent Russian school of anthropology, which is to a large degree a philosophical cultural anthropology. And I think it's one of the greatest achievements in the sector of historiography in Russia today in terms of comprehensive studies of peoples according to sources. And actually, he's not just a desk scientist. He spent a lot of time in the field, and he really cares. He really goes out and explores. And the book is written in a very lively language, which, again, is a rarity for the Russian science. So my best recommendations for this book, and let me pass the floor to Alexander Zheleznyakov, who did a review for this book. Maybe he can add a few words. Thank you. I've only known Maxim for a little while, but what I was impressed with, and something that we saw today again, was the attention to Altai as a living organism. And I think he's shown this amply. And in this book, Maxim delved quite deeply into all these matters with a lot of attention. I mean, we can speak at length, but it's best seen by the reader themselves, because the book speaks for itself, basically. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm humbled to present myself here, but let me just add a few words about how this book came to be. It really is dedicated to, well, it's a very practical work. I mean, it's all about models of development for cross-border regions of South Siberia, so that these regions would not be left behind in the process of globalization, would not be lost, so that they could develop without losing the values that they already have. Moreover, preserving and building upon this heritage to develop. It was written in the aftermath of the launch of a big national program about the role of the ethnic factor in national security and spatial development in the border regions of Russia. So this is part 3 of a series. I actually took 2 more books with me, and this is a successor. Back in 2017 and 2018, former head of Russian Railways, Viktor Yakunin, and I wrote a book about the belts and roads of Eurasia on projects of Eurasian integration, such as the Chinese project of Belt and Road. And it was written from the standpoint of the high geopolitics, but I'm a social anthropologist by background, and as such must draw conclusions by personal observation and included observation. So, having written this book, I took a bike from Moscow to Beijing, 8,000 kilometers by bike. It took me 100 days, and I was not just biking. There's another book about this, which nobody wants to publish because it's all about, bicycle travels. But in terms of today's presentation, it's important that when I took the Belt and Road route, which I had described from the quiet of my Moscow study with so much flourish, I saw that people who live along the route have not been benefited by these construction sites. Somebody asked me, would you like to live in a corridor? No, I would like to live in a room, in a proper room. You need to have rooms for living.
Все
And it turned out to be that all these major development belts are sucking all the contents, demographical ones, social, cultural ones, which are located between the points A and points B, which they interlinking. The corridor Moscow-Beijing, for both cities it will be good, but for what's in between, these all contents are being sucked out and replenished with the context coming from Moscow, Beijing. So it's very easy for Moscow and Beijing to fill it in with their context. I'm living in the Moscow region because we had some railway lines built around the Moscow city, and I'm fearing that we're going to get another Moscow around Moscow. And when I was going through Russia, Moscow, from Moscow to Mongolia, I was disappointed by the book I wrote. And I thought I should have written a different one, which was showing how it's possible to live for the people within these corridors, because we can't get rid of them. This is a challenge of the modern times, a challenge of globalization. And this cycling trip provided me with a recipe. When I was cycling through Mongolia, there were some mountain ways. They're not being covered with asphalt. They built, these cycling ways, they built 2 dots where the road is being installed. This is like a road barrier on the roads in the cities, and people just have to stay there. They just stop, have a thought, and then just lay some stones, feel the god, because there is a saying, nobody saw a god at the speed of 20 kilometers per hour. And it benefits us philosophically and also economically. Someone needs to mend his or her car, just have a breakfast, etc., just look around. So this could yield the establishment of some small development, economic development centers where we have not enough asphalted roads. So we could have such small regions and hubs which can benefit the development of the economic growth. So these bordering areas could be of use to both countries. My second book, which is called The Major Eastern Route, this is my dissertation on the trans-border peoples between Russia and China. It's not in the sense Mr. Tsimbursky referred to it. This is the safety belt, security belt. This is the place where development belts and safety and security belts are located. They are intersectioning each other at this point, and this enables us to maintain and secure this internal Asia, the space which had been serving the humankind for one reason, because it was free there from this intensive development. Just imagine if you furnish this whole room completely, then there is nothing to talk about, and here we have some emptiness, some void between us, and thanks to it we are having this conversation. The same applies to this continental conversation approach. We need to have some void from this free development. We need to fill everything in. We need to leave some voids. And this security belt, the eastern limit of, so this is partly located in the Republic of Tuva, Buryatia in Russia. And this should be, or could be, a counterweight to the development sites and hubs in China, which could benefit development of the southern Urals and eastern Siberia. I was happy to present this book here, specifically here in Altai, because this book highlights three-dimensional development models. So I would like to remind you that this book was written based on the program of the administration of the President of the Russian Federation targeted at developing the trans-border regions development. The idea is a practical one. The regions which are located at the intersection point of security belts and development belts could become the so-called, in Mongolian, Dava, these mountain ways, which shouldn't be completely built and furnished, but they need to be left semi-empty, and this will contribute to safety and security. So this book features 4 chapters, and one of them deals with maintaining the space for dialogue and conversation, and the other 3 chapters are dealing with Tuva and Buryatia republics and Altai Republic. And one dealing with Altai is called specifically protected natural reservoir. We have a notion of specifically protected natural habitats, which includes the idea that there are some lands and territories separate from these areas, and they have separate regulation governing its usage and utilization, which highlights the fragility of this natural habitats. And it's important to talk about it in the context of the maintenance of cultural and preservation of cultural identity. We need to approach this aspect both from the national but also from the global view, which helps us highlight the cultural role of our society in this area of activity, an area of responsibility for us. There's nothing secret in this book mentioned, and I believe I didn't mention anything I can't disclose here. So this book is published on the web portal of the University Center for Central Asia and China. So you can download it from there, have a read, and then provide your comments and feedback. I believe it's worth it. If you'd like to talk to me about it, I'll be there standing at the bookshelf or the book point. Please approach me and then we have a talk. There is a small coffee break highlighted in this agenda, so you can make use of it. Just come talk to me. Thank you very much.
Спасибо.